Hi, welcome to Connecting the Dots, the podcast where we share our stories from the battlefield of consulting. I'm your host, Johnny Hill.
I'm Patrick Stival.
I'm Ryan Brady.
Hey, I'm Kareem Jamal.
Today's episode is a little different. We'll be discussing our thoughts, concerns, and predictions around blockchain and cryptocurrency in more of an informal roundtable format. We're not all experts on this particular topic, but it is something that we were interested in discussing in a group setting. So we went ahead and recorded the conversation so we could share it with you. I hope you enjoy getting to hear our off-the-cuff thoughts around this topic. Let's get started. So obviously, blockchain is kind of a big topic. Cryptocurrency is a big topic, and there are a lot of opinions about this is either going to change the world or it's just kind of a fad. I'm curious y'all's thoughts, just kind of starting off, like how are we feeling about cryptocurrency and about blockchain as consultants, and kind of what are some of the ways we're seeing this show up in the work we're doing or in prospective work that's coming up?
It's definitely an exciting technology. It's kind of a running joke that, like, does your industry need blockchain? No. Probably not, but then again, there are certainly some promises and some uses for it. I think looking to it as also like the machine learning answer to everything technology is certainly misplaced. But
yeah, you kind of need a sober-minded approach to it, where it probably won't solve everything, but there are some key industries where it could be a significant factor or a game changer, or even just like a differentiator between you and your competitors, right?
Potentially, yeah.
So I think it is interesting though, because like obviously as people who work in technology, who work on custom software all day, every day, pretty much, there are some interesting kind of prospective applications for blockchain and crypto, specifically around things like financial services and supply chain. So I'm curious, let's spend a little bit of time talking about that and kind of what y'all are seeing there, some of the areas where there could be kind of, things going on that are worth noting.
I feel like there's a polarized view from the media itself about blockchain, where you have like some people saying that it's super revolutionary, and the other part just talking about NFTs and how useless stuff are in the blockchain. So I think we need to find the mid term here.
Yeah, I think there's potential there. It's still a very new technology, right? And that's why everyone's trying to find a use for it and how it fits in. And as with many things, as Ryan said, maybe the answer is that it really doesn't fit in your industry or your line of work, right? Do you always need a certain type of database? Do you always need serverless? Do you always need, pick your technology? Even if it's cool, the answer may be no, it's not needed. And I think that's what several people are finding out as they try to dive into this. So for some, it does fit. For others, it may not be a good fit, no matter how much they try to force it.
Right, and it may be a part of the solution, but it may not be the entire solution. I think that's another factor where you can kind of oversell it as this will solve all your problems, but there may be some key problems that you're facing where, like, actually, yeah, there's a pretty good solution there that blockchain can help solve this problem or make this more efficient. That's worth considering. But yeah, it's like another tool in a tool belt. It's not the whole tool belt itself.
I think the biggest thing that blockchain tries to provide, you could argue about whether or not it does well, is provide trust, because it's this whole idea of it's decentralized. No one person owns the ledger, and that anyone could go in and verify a transaction on the blockchain. And you could put, of course, there's the original, you get a coin, and the ledger is purely about tracking who owns how many coins. But there's also this whole, you could put something more interesting in there, like a contract or a digitized version of an image for your NFT. But the main idea is that it's decentralized, no one owns it, so you could trust it. I think that's truly what value that these blockchains attempt to bring to the market. But at the core of it, that's still fragile because you could have a super block of computers running the network that could take over the network, essentially centralize a decentralized network. So there's still
There's
issues
potential
there.
for, yeah, there's potential for misuse there.
I guess
That's an
the
interesting
other,
point, though. Go ahead.
I guess the other goal that was at least popular in the beginning was anonymity, but instead of having like a name, you have like an ash. But I think we're seeing more and more that at least that part of it is going away, where Bitcoin transactions truly can be traced to individuals and entities.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like, for the uninitiated, it may be good to start with like a general high level. Okay, what do we mean when we're talking about Bitcoin and blockchain and crypto, and like what just either the origins and kind of some of the terminology, what we're talking about here and how it works, just at a high level for anyone who's not super familiar with this, because I know it is a newer topic and a lot of people are still just trying to get their head around it.
Well, I think you put it very well. Blockchain is basically a tool for providing trust between many parties. And I kind of feel like it's still too limited to the financial world because it was born in that environment. But we have some other use cases for it. We can see like IBM has Hyperledger, and I'm sure they have some clients that use it for their specific use cases, but it's still limited.
You mentioned that it's very limited to, or people by default think about blockchain within the financial services or finance world. What are some of the areas you see it having value expanded outside of just that industry?
One
Outside of
interesting
finance?
case I came across a while back was education. And so you'd use the blockchain ledger to track all the courses you've taken, your degrees, your certifications. That way it's all in one place, easy to see, just all gathered, and as you do more academic stuff in the future, it all gets added to that, which I thought was an interesting use case. But then it also comes with its downsides because due to human error, if someone puts the wrong class or the wrong grade on that ledger, which is immutable, then undoing that or fixing that is a big headache. It's almost like having to go to the DMV and get your records corrected because it's just a very long and slow, painful process.
Could you get around that by having like a double, triple like check validation process before it's submitted into the blockchain in order to help curb that though?
Possibly. Now, how thorough people will be as they give their approvals for all these classes coming in, especially at the end of the semester, it's always comes down to the human weak link.
Let's be real here. You'd have to do some sort of like event store logic to like you have your original record and then you have updates or diffs to it. So now we're getting into another realm, right? So now you have to have something that sits on top of the blockchain, is not part of the blockchain, but knows how to read it and knows how to extract your records with all the corrections over time. But
Right.
that's probably how it would be done.
There are some services that they are not specifically about finance, but they are related somehow. Like we have Gitcoin, that is basically a blockchain for bug bounties, where someone posts a bug and any developer can try to contribute and they would get paid for the resolution. So it's a really cool project. And we also have blockchain for storage. So you can buy storage with some cryptocurrency and store your files in the blockchain, and you can make sure that it will be stored as long as you want. So,
And I think as we're talking, we are sort of covering what Johnny said earlier, is that it is a tool. If you're expecting blockchain to just solve everything, in and of itself, that's probably not the case, right? You can use it, but there has to be other things on top of it, as an approval process or an auditing system or all these other things like the event store, right? It'll come along with all of that.
Yeah, something that is interesting that is happening nowadays that wasn't happening in the beginning of the blockchain days is that we're starting to see blockchains interacting with each other. Like we have something that is called the wrapped Bitcoin, where you can have a Bitcoin in another blockchain, like in the Ethereum blockchain, and you can tie that Bitcoin to a smart contract or whatever, and that is really useful for applications.
So maybe I'm just naive here, but I'm curious. There's a part of me that wonders, I know a big part of crypto and blockchain was anonymity. We kind of touched on that at the beginning, like being a key factor, but then there's also concerns about, well, you can kind of trace it back to someone. And then there's also the idea of the ledger being like publicly verifiable information. How do you go about privacy while also having like accountability and clarity and like what's all happening? Because my understanding is there needs to be some kind of a balancing act there between like obviously private information either being hashed or accounted for in one way, but also there needs to be like a publicly accessible record. Or am I misunderstanding that, the need for that balance?
I think that we have most projects like Bitcoin, you can actually trace where the specific coin goes from and to, but there are projects that make it harder, like Monero. And there are also projects that connect the actual banking services to the cryptocurrency world, like BISC. So you can for sure make it harder for people to trace your money, but I wouldn't say that it's impossible.
It's kind of an interesting question. Would you ever store private information? Like, would you ever put something on the blockchain that you don't want people to know?
I would hope not, but someone somewhere will.
I mean, there's obscurity through just how many transactions, and it's just full of incomprehensible numbers, right? Like trying to scan for a particular NFT or something that looks like this is probably really hard on the blockchain, but like there's no promise of privacy for what's stored on the blockchain, is there?
Well, maybe if we think about the having a storage service in the blockchain, it could be interesting to have your files encrypted before uploading them. So you could decrypt them with your private key.
But again, like the idea is eventually you're going to share that with someone, right? Like okay, you would share it with like a limited number of parties. You could have a smart contract where when you fulfill it, you get the encryption key that you can download the file and decrypt it. Why not?
Patrick, you'd also mentioned some interesting elements around specifically like getting outside information into the blockchain and kind of connecting it with other information and just kind of the ways that can play out in other scenarios or other use cases.
Yeah, right. We have one example of that is the Chainlink. So Chainlink is basically a project for getting information from oracles. And from these oracles, you can get information from other blockchains and also from the real world. So you can bet on asset prices inside a specific blockchain. And if the oracles say that a certain price was reached, you can create smart contracts on top of that. And there are a lot of use cases for that. I don't have any on the top of my head, but betting could be one of them.
Yeah, so that seems to be getting more into once again, we were talking about blockchain technology as a tool in the tool belt being coupled with other systems for, reading and sending information in order to create a larger project or product that has the strengths of blockchain, but also has strengths of other systems built in, and just kind of some of that, the things that you could do that you can do otherwise without it, but you still need other dependencies there in order to make it work.
Yeah, because before that, the blockchain was just like this sandbox environment that is not really connected to the outside world unless you have something like an exchange or things like that. But now we're starting to grow into an environment where these blockchains can actually communicate with the outside world. So that's getting more interest over time, more interesting. And there's also now there are projects where you can swap coins based on automated market makers. You have like an algorithm to guess the price of assets according to demand. So that's another example where the blockchain suffices itself. We have like Uniswap for that. So you don't need an exchange anymore to swap different coins between different blockchains.
I'm also curious, we talked a little bit about other industries that we could see this expanding into. Another one that Expero has a lot of experience with, and generally we've worked with other companies on optimizing supply chain issues, which we're obviously all familiar with right now with the state of the world. Everyone is acutely aware that the supply chain could always be better or improved. And there's some unique cases for ways you could use blockchain technology to optimize that. And, let's spend a little bit of time talking about that, kind of what y'all have seen and what y'all expect moving forward. And maybe some of the ways that, since Expero has worked with supply chain companies in the past, things we can kind of anticipate coming.
Yeah, I think it's a hard problem in itself. Like you need, basically where the blockchain could be useful there is being a framework between multiple parties, but they would have to agree to use the blockchain in the first place, and they would have to agree to use the same blockchain. So supply chains can get pretty complicated, and having everyone agreeing to use the same blockchain can be a problem, I think.
But once there's a standard established, I feel like it's kind of like the growing pains that we're experiencing now, I feel like. But if there were to be a standard established that could kind of foster that, I feel like the pros would be pretty significant though, right?
Yeah, for sure. The hard part is getting there, I think. But once we have something like this established, it could be really beneficial. You would know exactly where some product came from, or you could know it's a quality product and its sources.
Could that also be helpful in things like giving customers more visibility into like the sustainability and the ethical background behind like the sourcing for the products that they're buying? So, because I know that's a big frustration and question for a lot of people is, oh, I didn't realize this product I bought was built from materials that were sourced unethically. I don't want to support that. But that kind of information, making that accessible, I wonder if there's a case there for that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, does it really solve that problem? You could store any kind of things on the blockchain, and so we trust that the data and the transactions, but do we really trust what you put in there? If you say that this was handmade in the United States, but actually you imported it from somewhere else, like I don't think the blockchain in any way gives any guarantee that the data that's entered, like the transaction is there, like,
it doesn't, but it can say who put it in there.
Yeah.
If someone finds it out, it could point to whoever did that. But for sure, you could think of some way of doing that without blockchain. So maybe you're right.
Yeah, it gets into an interesting question, Ryan. You were saying about like the difference between the quality of the data and the verifiability that yes, the data has not changed, but that doesn't necessarily speak to whether it was accurate to begin with.
No, in the whole supply chain, there are many individual actors. It's not one mega corporation controlling it all, thank goodness. You've got materials, miners, raw materials, you have people who put it together. You have any number of logistics on the steps, most tons and tons of logistics. Each one of these is a private small company until you finally get to like the final freight that's handled by a big player like UHF, I mean UPS but so the solution blockchain offers is now here's like, okay, nobody owns this database. It's decentralized. Everybody is working off of this, and you can, here's some protocols to read and write to it, but you can trust it because it's not FedEx that owns everything. It's decentralized. That's a value that I could see people getting on board with if the cost of entry, like right now, the tech required to like one write to the blockchain to say like, I produced this product on this date at this location and I'm shipping it here. That's hard. And then you have to get people to adopt it because they have to be able to read it from the blockchain. But if the cost of entry and the technology got lower, I could absolutely see that getting adoption and being useful for the greater good.
Yeah, I feel like there's another element there kind of related to that we haven't touched on, is like just the overall public perception. There's a lot to be gained or lost on if the public, or like generally if people are willing to accept a new technology. I think blockchain is interesting because it's kind of hard to get your head around initially. I think you kind of hear about it a few times before it starts to click for a lot of people. But yeah, people need to be able to understand it and trust it in order for it to kind of take hold in some ways. I think there are other areas where like it can kind of be there working in the background like a system. It's making things more efficient. It doesn't really matter if people understand it or not. But I do think it's kind of a high profile technology and that a lot of people are like on the fence about it right now. So there's that whole other side of it, just like public perception and assumptions around it.
And it's a good point because I'm sure a lot of people are like, you secured this with Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is down 50% today. Mm-hmm. Or you use Bitcoin for this. Why? It's so expensive. Like people get so focused on the price of the coin and not like the other tangential things that it could do that would be the value add of something like supply chain, that there's a lot of things that disrupt the trust of that system.
Yeah, I think one of the beneficial things that the blockchain brought, not in itself, but around the people that use it, is that it brought back that sense that you shouldn't trust anyone by default. So the number of scams that you have in the blockchain ecosystem, and like if you make a transaction to the wrong wallet, you're screwed, and you should basically just trust in yourself in that world.
So like introducing a healthy skepticism to
exactly.
Yeah.
I do feel that blockchain and crypto overall just suffer from a PR image problem because people have associated it so much with crypto in general, and just seeing the market volatility of Bitcoin going up and then going down, then going up to 80,000, and people selling their houses and taking double mortgages, and then all of a sudden it drops and they lose everything, right? It seems to be very, very volatile, especially when some key players go on Twitter and post something about certain coins, and all of a sudden it spikes or drops or whatever, right? So it's too easy to manipulate it, and all of that has given it a bad image. There's also this undercurrent of the fact that, hey, some of this blockchain technology is being used for money laundering and things like that, right? Which it may be, but when people think blockchain, they immediately start thinking about these negative things.
Yeah, we had like this recent case of Terra Luna, where we had this coin which was supposed to be pegged to the US dollar, the USD, but it was so liquidated that the coin just vanished. So a lot of people lost so much money on this. It's really sad.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if we're getting into the distinction, blockchain isn't exclusively like tied to Bitcoin, but in people's minds, they're so connected that, oh, well, if one of them has these weird things going on, like you're saying, it's really volatile right now. If I hear anything related to blockchain, I think, oh, volatile, Bitcoin, danger, when it could be completely unrelated. It's just using the underlying technology. So yeah, kind of getting back to that PR nightmare that you were describing, Kareem, part of the issue is like, how do you communicate what it actually is and how it's actually just like a technology. It's not like a form of currency in and of itself if you're talking about blockchain, but they get so intertwined in people's heads that can create, other issues with trust and with, not being sure if you want that.
Yeah, and when we're talking about money laundering, I think that the hardest part is like getting the money from the real world into the blockchain with anonymity, because bringing the money from the blockchain into the real world isn't so hard. Like there are websites that sell, for instance, Amazon gift cards or anything like that you can buy directly in crypto. So I think the hardest part, where the focus point of getting people that are related to this, to money laundering, would be getting them when they're entering the blockchain.
And I think it is important, as we were saying, to approach this with a heavy dose of skepticism, rightly so, because just like in crypto, where it can be easily manipulated with, a couple key players, as Ryan alluded to earlier, where if you get enough central servers, you now have centralized, decentralized system, right? And maybe we're not seeing that yet because there aren't enough companies and others on blockchain, but you always have to be aware that if more and more businesses go that route, then it becomes more lucrative to centralize those servers, right? And someone will find a way to do that, and you might be then stuck, working around that or figuring out backup solutions or trying to change out your core tech all of a sudden because someone has taken over the decentralized network.
Yeah, that's something that I also think is really interesting in the blockchain, that even if it's flawed, in some cases, it still survives. Like if there's a really bad bug in your blockchain, you can always create a fork. The price will be affected, but it will survive if there is enough people working on it. So I think Ethereum had a fork where now we have Ethereum Classic and normal Ethereum. So that happens too.
Great example where the network's just kind of split, right? Some people decided they weren't going to do it, and the network had to fight for a while between people upgrading and people not upgrading, until finally they just forced the split between the network and became two.
Yeah, so I'm curious, just as as technologists, as consultants in kind of this world, just overall your reactions and thoughts. We've talked about kind of the need for maybe a healthy skepticism and kind of keeping an eye on things and recognizing there's value, but be careful with it. But I'm just kind of curious, y'all's approaches and reactions in general to the thought of blockchain being incorporated into more industries and technologies in new ways, maybe some we expect and some we don't. And then any things that y'all, predictions or concerns for the future, just things that y'all are in this world have been thinking about, pondering on as we kind of go into the future and see this technology showing up in more areas and in different ways.
Energy usage is a big concern for most blockchains, Bitcoin in particular. I do worry about that to some degree, and I do always think that like speculation and investing and schemes, because it's a completely unregulated market, that those are like valid concerns for like trusting your data on the blockchain is something you it's a high enough concern that you probably have to duplicate it, that you have your data on the blockchain and you have your data on your own network. Just because maybe as the cryptocurrency becomes more mature over time, maybe that starts to go away, maybe that doesn't. But that's where we are today.
Yeah, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but I already heard that Bitcoin miners are majorly in countries with renewable energy, so that like the carbon footprint wouldn't be so large.
I think that's a completely other cool story, right? Like the Bitcoin miners are where energy is cheap, either by government subsidy or otherwise. And it's kind of fascinating growing story about how economical renewable energy is becoming and at such a rate. Some of that is just because like there's wind generators way out in West Texas where no one lives. It's a desert and there's lots of free wind energy there. But some of it is not, that like really some of these renewable energies are becoming cheaper and the miners are taking advantage of that cheap energy.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing, I don't know who would have predicted that cryptocurrency would have been a catalyst for renewable energy to become more and more prevalent. But it's a cool kind of connection there.
Do we think we'll run into limits later with more and more blockchain and miners increasing? Even though we're increasing renewable energy, on the flip side, we are seeing a rise in electric vehicles and things like that, right? And to the point where many electric grids are starting to get stressed, especially in the very hot summer months. Do we think there'll come a time where countries or sectors start restricting or limiting, throttling your usage of, blockchain generation to where it starts affecting your business because the transactions can't be processed fast enough?
Yeah, it's a concern. So this, I think part of that problem is that to get more trust, you need more people on the network. The more decentralized you are, the more trust you have. But more people are on the older networks like Bitcoin that are less energy efficient and are slower. And do you take a gamble on a blockchain that uses a more efficient, what do they call the algorithms that verify transactions?
Of work and stake.
Yeah, right. So do you jump to one of those that's more efficient and more reliable and faster at the cost of trust? That's the key, right?
So really the takeaway is if you first evaluate if it is a good fit for your business, and if it is, think of it as a tool and still have a backup, because with this technology still in its infancy, it can go any which direction, right? At the whims of the people that are sort of driving that direction. So if you need to back away from it or switch entirely, it would be good to have sort of a plan B in place.
Yeah, and ask lots of forward-thinking questions about, like you were saying, okay, how can we embrace efficiency and kind of think ahead to maybe some future concerns here? Just asking those questions early on, even if it does end up still being the solution you go for, and say, yeah, we do want to use blockchain for this solution. Thinking ahead and asking those questions early so that you can be prepared.
Thanks for connecting with us today. If you have a complex software problem that needs solving, thoughts on what we discussed today, or ideas on what topics we should tackle next, feel free to reach out to us at podcast@experoinc.com or on Twitter @experoinc. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.